Good afternoon. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Major Moneymaker. You're probably, some of you have seen this uniform before. It's not an Air Force uniform. It looks a little bit different than what you're used to seeing. It is, we're going to be talking about the Army today. We're going to be talking about the Army all week. So since this is the first day, I'm going to do kind of a hometown hero format. I think you've been exposed to that before. I'm going to talk about a very complex and difficult topic. Me. Okay? But I'm going to talk about the uniform for a minute because it is different. If you have seen the Army uniform in the past years, it was a green uniform. Remember that? Green, kind of a green shirt. When I first came in the Army, it was a light or a kind of a brown shirt. This uniform is the Army. It used to be the Army mess uniform or dress uniform, and that goes back to the Army the uniform of the cavalry. You start watching like old John Wayne movies, you'll see a uniform very much like this with the shoulder straps for the rank and the different colors. Theirs was a double-breasted uniform. Now we've gone to this. If you put a bow tie on this, it counts as a tuxedo, actually, for the Army. Something about the uniform, if you notice on the cuff, you'll see a stripe, 2 rows of gold, and a color. That's my branch color. Likewise, on the shoulder straps, you see a branch color. It is royal blue with orange piping, and it designates me as an Army aviator. And we'll talk about branches later in the week. That you watch some of the older movies, you'll see a cavalry officer. His shoulder straps look like they're all yellow. You barely see rank in there. Each branch has a different color. Armor is yellow, armor and cavalry. Artillery is red. Infantry was a sky blue, and there's other reds and such like that. But enough about that. About me. You guys are all in junior ROTC, so you know what ROTC stands for. I am a product of the ROTC program at the University of California at Davis. I was commissioned into the Army after 4 years of college. I was what was known as a distinguished military student my senior year, and a DMG, or distinguished military graduate, my final year. What that really meant, the accession process out of ROTC has changed in the last few years. It used to be coming out of ROTC, only a few people went into the regular component, others went into the reserve or the guard component. When I was commissioned as a regular Army in the branch of infantry. Excuse me. What that meant is the Army, I believe the Air Force might be the same, the branches of the Army. Your opportunity for schools, opportunity for assignments and whatnot are determined by your data rank. And things that people look at is your data rank, time of service and data rank. So all the ROTC DMGs were commissioned exactly one day after the regular Army West Point class. So we were one day behind West Point in the service academies as far as what we were allowed to do. Then all the rest of the folks that were commissioned came after us. I talked about I'm a pilot. When I was first commissioned, there was no aviation branch. I went into the Army wanting to fly, but you had to spend 3 years in a ground assignment before you could go to flight school. For me, there was a very logical choice. Infantry, to me, there was no other branch in the Army. Everything in the Army supports the infantry. All the combat multipliers support the infantry. You look at the Marine Corps, really supports the infantry. Everything supports the infantry because no matter what we have in the way of technology, combat multipliers, high technology stuff, it still takes a guy to stand on the ground with a rifle in his hand and say, this is ours. As an Army aviator, I could fly my Cobra and dominate terrain for a specific period of time as long as I had bullets and fuel, but I had to go away. To own the terrain, you have to put something on the ground. So for me, infantry was the logical course. So I was commissioned in the infantry, and I went to something called the Infantry Officers Basic Course, or OBC. And throughout the Army, all new lieutenants go to an officer branch course. Who knows where Fort Huachuca, Arizona is? You ever heard of that place? It's down near Sierra Vista, south of Tucson. That is a branch course, schoolhouse, if you will, for the military intelligence branch, which is a combat support arm. Spread throughout the country. Fort Benning, Georgia is for the infantry. Fort Knox, Kentucky is for the armor. Fort Sill, Oklahoma is the artillery. And then military intelligence at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. So I went to Fort Benning. I went there for my basic course, airborne school, ranger school, pathfinder school, all the different Army type schools. After honing your skills as a beady-eyed killer as an infantry officer, then I went to my first assignment, which was the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I was assigned as a rifle platoon leader, so I was responsible for about 33 people, for basically everything, your health, welfare, training, what went good, what went bad, anything that happened or failed to happen on my watch, I was responsible for. That's something that the military, not just the Army, but all the military teaches you. When you come out of college and you go into the military, you have so much stuff thrown at you as far as responsibility. It's a good management program, among other things, that you take somebody else that might have had the same major as you, and they go into the civilian world. They might be in a junior executive pool, or they might be treated as the newbie, where when you walk into a military assignment as a lieutenant, you are immediately responsible for everything. So I spent, and at the 82nd, the operational tempo is pretty fast because new lieutenants come in as other lieutenants are heading off. After about 3 years in the Army, you go to something called the captain's course or your advanced course. Teach how to be a company commander, and teaches you how to work on a staff and things like that. So as the lieutenants have been there for 3 years, we're heading out to their, in my case, back to Fort Benning. New guys are coming in. So about every 6 to 8 months, you're changing jobs in an Army unit. And so you have to move quickly as far as you set up a training program. Here's where we are as far as training. This is what we want to be able to do. What's it take to get there? And you've got 6 to 8 months to put all that together. So I went from a rifle platoon to a mortar platoon. You guys know what mortars are?
Yes.
Indirect fire. So 81 millimeter mortar platoon. I was the direct fire support officer for the infantry company I was in. And we had a battalion had a 4.2 inch for use, and then division had, of course, artillery. I was in there for, again, about 6 to 8 months. I can't remember now, somewhere in there. For a while, I was running both platoons because my platoon sergeant was running the rifle platoon, but I kind of had overwatch on it. Although, interestingly, the main purpose of that sergeant in that platoon was to teach me as a lieutenant how to be a better officer, how to be a good company commander when the time came. I was being programmed to move up to battalion staff to work in the S3 air shop and move on to a recon platoon, but I had an opportunity to go down and be a pathfinder. You guys familiar with what a pathfinder is?
Yeah.
Okay. It's, at that time, there were only 2 pathfinder platoons in the entire Army, one the 101st Airborne Division, one the 82nd. So the opportunity to take charge of that unit was very inviting. And I had kind of a dual purpose. That platoon was based out of the aviation battalion division. So if I wanted to go to flight school, what better chance to kind of rub elbows with pilots and maybe help my cause along. The pathfinders are the proponents for air assault operations, training people how to conduct an air assault, of how to tactical cross-load folks in helicopters, put an air mission together, kind of kludge all that stuff together to make a successful air assault operation. Sling load, that is picking up equipment by helicopters moving around the battlefield, conducting small drop zones and such. Pathfinders have a motto of first in, last out. Pathfinders lead the way. Obviously, if it was going to be a drop zone that was going to be prepped by a lot of artillery or close air support, Pathfinders wouldn't be there. It's kind of dangerous. We were trained explosives to go in and clear out drop zones. One of the training missions we did at Fort Bragg is I was always a believer of train as realistically as possible. So we got the approval to go into the impact area and clear out a drop zone using C4 explosives on trees. It was set up, it came in, we dropped in, infiltrated in, set up all the explosives on the trees, blew that as an air assault came in behind us. It's kind of cool. You don't get to do that too often. It was fun. I'll be honest, it was fun doing that too. We went through, as a Pathfinder, went to the rough terrain parachute school taught by the Department of Forestry. They came to us and taught us because we did a lot of purposeful jumps into trees. Our drop zones were small, and there's a different technique when you do a jump into a tree on how you deal with your equipment. We were taught how to do that purposefully. Not the ideal way to jump. We also were the proponents for, as the Black Hawk, the UH-60 was coming into the Army's inventory, the boards that did all the acceptance of the aircraft did a bunch of stuff, but then it came out to us, and we were some of the first to do tactical jumps out of Black Hawks, to rappel out of it, fast rope, and stable. You guys know what stable is? If you've ever seen an air show where a helicopter picks up, mainly some Marines that do it anymore, they pick up 4 or 5 guys underneath the helicopter, they're dangling on a rope. That's stable. It's an extraction technique, and that was a mission that we had as Pathfinders, to where you had to get in, and if you had to get out, the stable was how you get out. And that was kind of fun. I don't think I'd want to do it in combat because you're kind of a hanging target out there. Anyway, after the time as a Pathfinder, my family, I picked up orders for flight school. When I would normally be going to my advanced course, along with my peer group, I went to Fort Rucker, Alabama for flight school. And being a kid from Northern California, moving to North Carolina was one thing to get used to humidity. Moving down to lower Alabama was an entirely different thing. We moved there in August of 1982. It was humid. You could actually see the humidity hanging in the air. It was very uncomfortable. The flight school has changed a little bit, but when I went through learning how to fly an aircraft called the TH-55, it's a Hughes 300, kind of a small version of the Hughes 300. They called it the Mattel Messerschmitt because most of the components were made by the Mattel Toy Corporation, or the Mattel Corporation. It was belt driven, so to get the power from the engine to the transmission was a series of rubber belts, which kind of, is this thing really going to work? It did. After that, transitioned to the Huey, a phase called contact, learned how to fly the Huey and all its systems, instrument rating, and then I transitioned into the scout track, which was the Army, it's OH-58 Bell-Jet Ranger. You've seen them around. In fact, it's still being used now. It's the OH-58 Delta, which is called the AHIP. You'll see that whenever you see Apaches flying around, there's usually a scout with its little gumball machine looking thing on top and such. We learned how to do screening operations, cavalry operations, security operations, command and control enhancement, and we were some of the first flight classes to go through and get fully goggle qualified so we could fly with night vision goggles. Night vision goggles were kind of new in the Army. People used them on patrol. We started flying with them and gave us the ability to provide, if the infantry was on the ground at night, now we were able to bring attack helicopter assets full of night vision goggles. At least that was the intent. After graduation, I did what was known as a turnaround transition, went from the scout course and flight school immediately to the Cobra course. That was my objective all along, was to fly attack helicopters. And being in the scout track, it tied in nicely to what I was going to do with attack helicopters. I flew something called the fully modernized Cobra, which, except for the Marine Corps flying, everything I flew is in the museum now. So how relevant is this talk, right? Cobra transition was good. We learned how to do attack helicopter operations and fired the TOW, tube launched optically tracked wire guided missile, an anti-tank missile, the 20mm cannon, and a 2.75-inch fully thin air rocket, about a 15-pound warhead with a shoot down range. After completion of the Cobra course, off to Germany. My first assignment as a pilot was with 3rd Armored Division in Germany. We were part of 5th Corps, also known as V Corps. At that time, Germany was set up with 2 corps, each having 2 heavy divisions, an armored division and mechanized infantry division. And later this week, we'll talk about the differences between those as we talk more about the Army and how it's structured. The 2 heavy divisions had an armored cavalry regiment, which was the screening force. That was the eyes and ears, early warning for the Corps commander. The 11th ACR sat in the Fulda Gap. Fulda Gap is a traditional direction of invasion for forces from the east coming into Western Europe. So it was a very, very critical place to be. The 11th ACR had tanks, it had artillery, and it had helicopters, but only had 1 squadron of attack helicopters, basically. So in the event of the proverbial balloon going up, which was a euphemism for the war starting, at that moment, the 3rd Armored Division, which I was assigned to, the 8th Infantry Division, which was our sister division, immediately gave up each company of attack helicopters, which was 21 helicopters each, and we became under the operational control of the 11th ACR. Though I wore the 3rd Armored Division patch on my shoulder, I was more of an 11th ACR pilot than I was an 3rd Armored Division, because we spent so much time going up into their general defense area, flying with them, training with them, learning. We had to be able to fly the General Defense Plan, or the GDP, without a map, basically. You know, in this firing position, this area, we would have our communication sheets for what the frequencies would be if the war happened. Those would change every 24 hours, but the battle positions were the same. At the time, I think there were, if you had all the assets in the world to build a bridge and no one's shooting at you, within our sector, there were only 15 areas that had the right soil and approaches that you could actually cross the Fulda River with a tank. So those became our kill zones. It didn't matter about the rest of the stuff. Those were our kill zones. So we had to know those. We had to know the battle positions, the primary high positions, how we'd move in. So we trained with 11th ACR a lot. And again, later in the week, we'll talk about covering force battles and things like that in the old traditional linear battlefield. And so though we were 3rd Army Division, we really worked for the 11th ACR. Then after the covering forces over, we'd pull back, reconstitute, go back and fight for 3rd Army Division. At that time, I was a platoon commander. If you think back when I talked about when I first arrived in the 82nd, I was a platoon leader. Now I'm talking about platoon commander. Officers command officers. Officers lead soldiers. In a rifle platoon, mortar platoon, or pathfinder platoon, I was the only officer, so I was a platoon leader. In an aviation unit, I had many other officers. Every pilot was an officer. In fact, I had more officers than enlisted men in my company. It was numbers-wise very small. Our common in the battlefield was rather tremendous, with 7 Cobras and 358s, and what we could do. It was a very dynamic force on the battlefield. So I was a platoon commander. While I was in Germany, we reorganized from a TONE is a term used in the Army for Table of Organization Equipment. We were an H-Series TONE, we became a J-Series TONE. So our aviation battalion became a brigade, our aviation companies became battalions, and the platoons became companies. So I got a company command out of doing the same thing I was doing as a platoon leader. After that time was over, I went back to the advanced course, the captain's course back at Fort Rucker, about 6 months long, teach you how to be a company commander, how to work on the staff, and also after the pace of being in frontline units, where you usually start at 4:35 in the morning, you usually go to 7 at night. Now it was like a schoolhouse, it was 9 to 5, it was kind of nice, get to know my wife and kid again. After that, I was assigned to Southern California. My father passed away, and I asked the Army, can you assign me close to my mom? She's not doing well. So they assigned me to the 6th Army, which is in Presidio, San Francisco. I was further reassigned to the 6th Army Advisors Group at a place called Los Alamitos. It's an Army airfield near Long Beach, California. In fact, if you ever go to Disneyland, you see the helicopters flying over, they're coming out of that airfield. Disneyland is a reporting point for that airfield. So I was assigned to the 40th Infantry Division, mechanized California National Guard. And I was the advisor to the cavalry squadron, which had 2 troops of helicopters and 2 troops of tanks. And we'll talk about troops and companies and batteries later in the week also. I thought I was going to a cavalry squadron with attack helicopters with Cobras and all that. It wasn't. It was all Mike model Huey gunships. If you ever see an old movie of King Kong, it was made back in the 70s with, I think it's Beau Bridges or one of the Bridge brothers, and Jessica Lange. In the final scene, King Kong was shot off at the top of the World Trade Center. Those are Mike model Hueys, UH-1 Mike or M's. It was a Huey with 7.62 miniguns on each side and a 40mm grenade launcher on the nose.
It was beauty that killed the beast.
Pardon?
It was beauty that killed the beast.
It was beauty that killed the beast. Yeah, well those helicopters came from our unit. The Hollywood came out and used our helicopters. They set up stuff and filmed stuff, and I wasn't there when it happened, obviously, but they told me about, oh yeah, they did this. In a recent movie, they came out again, just because Long Beach is close to Hollywood, it gets used for things. I was disappointed when I first got there, because I'd worked with reserve units before, and their scout aircraft were the Hughes 500, OH-6, a great many time in OH-6, not Alpha Model 58s, but Mike Model Huey. So in my flight log, I am rated as an attack helicopter pilot of both the Cobra and the Mike Model Huey. It was kind of fun to fly in. The California National Guard, the 40th Division is assigned to I Corps or First Corps. They're based out of Fort Lewis, Washington, at least they were at the time. I Corps had a mission for Korea support. So if there was ever another war in Korea, 40th Division as a mechanized infantry division was designed or assigned the mission of the heavy counterattack punch. Once the North Korean hordes were stopped, we deploy forces over, this mechanized infantry division would provide the oomph to put the North Koreans back across the border. Honestly, the chance of that mission ever happening was kind of small, pretty remote. And at the time, the Army was fielded with M60A3 tanks, and the M1 Abrams was just coming in inventory. They still had something called the M48A5 patent tank, a very old tank, but that matched what the Koreans had. We had a better chance of doing the other mission of the National Guard, which is, if mobilized by the governor for civilian disturbance, which when the Rodney King LA riots broke out, that unit was put out in the front lines. Natural disaster, we supported a couple earthquakes because our reconnaissance aircraft, scouts could quickly fly over the LA basin and check out bridges and such. And then we were getting ready to go to annual training, and just before, the morning of the annual training, we were mobilized, federalized. There's a rule called the posse comitatus. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's preventing military forces from conducting operations in the United States, simply put. As a regular Army officer, I couldn't participate in any of that stuff. When they federalized us to support force fire detail, now I could fly along. The Mike model Hueys, the weapon systems are bolted to the aircraft. We took those off. We deployed to Northern California to a place called Lake Pillsbury, where growing up I used to water ski. And now we're on the airfield there fighting forest fires. So my state is burning down. I'm able to do something with what I was trained to do as a pilot. We were flying forestry crews around with chainsaws, pickaxes, water, and MREs. We would drop them off. They would work on the fires, and then we'd go back and pick them up. Oh, did I mention that these guys were convicts? They were all, I forget which correctional institution they're out of, but they were close to getting out, kind of parole, but we had guys that were convicts in the back of our helicopters with pickaxes and chainsaws and shovels and all that, mattocks, and we're flying them and dropping them off, but I think they were more afraid of us than we were of them. You got pretty close to them because they realized when we dropped them off, we'd go away, we'd come back and pick them up or bring water. It was kind of interesting that to be able to do something in my home state as a military officer. After that time, I was reassigned to the 7th Division, Infantry Division Light at Fort Ord, California. You guys are probably too young to remember Operation Just Cause, where we went down. What years were you guys born?
1991.
Man, I feel old. Back in 1980, 99, 91, and all that, 89, 91, we took a force into Panama and took Manuel Noriega out of power. He was kind of a convict wearing the uniform of a president, in my opinion. The 7th Division, though assigned to 1st Corps at Fort Lewis, was also on most of the operational plans of the Rapid Deployment Joint Task Force, which was basically 18th Airborne, 82nd Airborne Division, the 101st Airborne Division, the 24th Mechanized Division out of Fort Stewart, Georgia, and the 11th ACR, because as Europe was pulled down, the 11th ACR became the 18th Corps Army Cavalry Regiment, and then the 7th Division, and a separate brigade, either the 197th or 193rd out of Fort Benning, Georgia. All these forces went down to Panama and removed this guy from power. One of our helicopters was shot down, and when it hit the water, the pilot broke his neck, so we lost a pilot in the thing. A very good friend of mine, his name was Tom Muir, was flying Blackhawks. And a small war story here for a minute. Whenever we went into a tactical flight mode, as you started to get down the trees, and I'll talk later this week about flight school and flight techniques, but when you got down into nap of the earth flying, which is you're really down into the trees with a Cobra, you could be hovering with the treetops sitting beside you and the Cobra sitting between them. Whenever we went into that mode, regulation was to take your visor on your helmet and slide it down. What's a clear plastic visor? What good will that do, right? Kind of always scoffed at that. My friend Tom Muir, he was a captain also, was shot in the head with a 7.62 round, or 308. He was, unfortunately, the Black Hawk he was flying got sprayed, got lit up by ground fire. Several people in the back were wounded, a couple were killed. They were from the 82nd, we were flying around. And as Tom was leaning forward to tune the radio, the round came through his visor, deflected it, it entered his head right here. Went along the eye ground, came out. burial service for the pilot that was killed. I'd seen Tom on TV receiving a Purple Heart sitting in the hospital. He had bandages and stuff on his head, and General Thurman was putting his Purple Heart on his pillow and all that. Here, 4 or 5 days later, he's back at Fort Ord. Looked like he had a bad case of that, and it didn't heal right here, and a little butterfly stitch. He took a 7.62 round to the head. Very lucky, you know.
Okay.
Pardon?
Liquefied his brain.
Pardon?
If that round had hit his head.
Oh, it would, yeah.
Yeah.
It would tell him that this thunderstorm, I'm not standing next to you because all your good luck's been used up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the funny thing was, the Brigade XO was standing outside and we're talking to him, and Tom's not wearing his Purple Heart. We were in the Class A uniform. He goes, "Where's your Purple Heart?" He goes, "I didn't earn it." He didn't feel that he earned a Purple Heart because people got shot up pretty bad in the back, and he just had a couple scratches. It's the type of guy he was. He was sincere about it too. Anyway, Fort Ord, I was the S3, and that meant I was the Operations Plans and Training Officer for the attack helicopter battalion. I was attached to at Fort Ord. Put me number 3 in the chain of command, the battalion commander of the XO and the S3. After I did that, I went down and I got to command an attack helicopter company again at Fort Ord. It was great. I enjoyed the time. I didn't want to stop. If I could have stayed a captain the rest of my career and been a company commander, I would have been a happy guy. But after that command, while I was in that job, I was going through the process of training. I was applying to an aviation unit, had a rather rigorous application process. I was out doing a land nav course, and I tore my knee up. And I had my knee operated on before I came in the Army. I had an ACL reconstruct. I re-injured that pretty bad. For about the last 5 months of my command, I wore a knee brace underneath my uniform, my flight suit almost the whole time, because I had what was known as no end point. My knee would collapse on me. I was told when I came out of command, I was going to have to operate. If I want to stay in the Army, I had to have my knee fixed because I couldn't. I was non-deployable with that. It kind of hid the fact how bad it was. I came out of command. I went up to division staff because it was a good job to be in to recoup from surgery. I went up to the G3 Air Shop, and I was what was known as the Assistant Division Aviation Officer for the division. I was the Aviation Brigade Commander's mouthpiece on division staff, and I had something known as the DAME, or the Division Airspace Management element. All these things I'm putting out. This class today is kind of a preamble for what we'll talk about throughout the week on the Army. So some of these things you're going, what are you talking about? Well, I'll explain as the week goes on. The Division Airspace Management element had the FADAC computer, which was the fire control computer that all the artillery areas would display in. We had the air defense artillery element, pardon me, the Air Force element with all their liaisons, and then the Army Airspace Management element, which I had. So all that together, anything that went through the air, be it a bullet or an aircraft, we were charged with trying to set up airspace control procedures to deconflict fast movers from the Air Force, slow movers from the Army, and bullets flying around. And that was the job. It was fun. We rewrote some of the stuff because after Desert Storm, there was a lot of discussion on how the heck do we do this, because it's a complicated thing. During Desert Storm, I think anything above 1,500 feet AGL was Air Force, anything below was Army, and that was the initial deconfliction. It's a tough nut to crack that people still grapple with, how to deconflict the airspace over a division so you don't get shot down by friendlies. And that if something is flying over, you know you can shoot them because they're enemy. After that time, I went through surgery, and I was scheduled to recover, get my knee fixed, recoup, and then go to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, which is right where I was assigned, learn Spanish, then go to the fixed wing qualification course back to Rucker, and off to Quito, Ecuador, to fly fixed wing aircraft for the State Department because of the altitudes and distances. It's transportation. Where do you want to go today, sort of type of thing. Wow, this is great. My wife speaks Spanish. I'll learn Spanish. My aunt and uncle are missionaries in Ecuador. I'll be in Quito. Oh, family down there. And oh wow, by the way, I'm going to have a commercial pilot's license in a multi-engine turboprop aircraft that resembles many of the commuter aircraft you see. Great profession for when I retired from the Army. I went to the hospital, had my knee fixed, and got infected. A 4-day stay turned into almost 4 months, and I almost lost my leg. But I walked out with everything that I'm supposed to have attached, but the Ecuadorian job was off the table, so I ended up going overseas to Japan for 3 years with my family. And I worked in the U.S. Army Japan 9th Corps. The headquarters building was designed by General Douglas MacArthur, and he was the military governor of Japan. That's where he was based out of. There's a lot of history in the building and such. I was working in the G3 shop. The